Everyone says the Republican leadership is just out of control, crazy, and they just don't know what they're doing. Even some Republicans say that. And that's one explanation, a possible explanation for what you're seeing in Washington. But what if, just what if, the Republicans know exactly what they're doing, and what they're doing is shutting down the presidency?
It's day 7 of the government shutdown.
The shutdown is entering week 2.
Week 2 looks a lot like week 1.
There are not the votes in the House to pass a clean CR.
They should prove it.
Put it on the floor Monday or Tuesday.
Hold a vote. Call a vote right now.
Put it on the floor and give it a chance.
Let the bill go to the floor and let's see what happens.
There are not the votes in the House to pass a clean CR.
Except that you have more Republicans coming out.
There are as many as 22 Republicans.
And saying that they'll support a clean CR.
Really?
Meanwhile, in Washington,
The shutdown got married
The debt limit is right around the corner.
with the debt ceiling crisis,
The second thing Congress needs to do is to raise the debt ceiling next week.
which makes the stakes so much higher.
The votes are not in the House to pass a clean debt limit.
John Boehner just kept saying, I want to have a conversation.
We asked to sit down and have a conversation. A conversation. The simple conversation.
Boehner used the word conversation
We've had conversations before.
22 times in that interview.
Republicans are acting kind of childish.
They don't care about larger fiscal issues.
The goalposts have moved again.
suddenly it's not about health care. Now they're stuck.
For them, a win is
Full capitulation by the president.
have the president capitulate on something.
Is that what's going on?
To have him cry uncle, period.
It was time for us to take a stand.
The public has to weigh in.
It's time for us to stand and fight.
It's not enough to take a stand. In the end, you have to govern.
The Boehner bunglers. That's the way much of the media sees the shutdown of the federal government. In fact, that's the headline of Paul Krugman's column in the New York Times today, which is an indisputable presentation of the absurdity of what we've been watching, which Krugman ascribes to what he called the, quote, deeply incompetent House Republican leadership. The truly incompetent, as Krugman wisely points out, can't even recognize their own incompetence. The professor goes on to refer to the House of Representatives as the Keystone Cops and the Boehner bunglers. Professor Krugman may well have the entire explanation right there in his 781-word column. Incompetence. But there is another possibility. The one no one is considering, the one that the appearance of incompetence is the perfect way to mask. What if John Boehner and the House Republican leadership and Senator Ted Cruz know exactly what they're doing and exactly why they're doing it? What if they are playing a much longer game and a bigger game than anyone has noticed? What if their concern is not how many seats will they win or lose in the next congressional election? What if their concern is the presidency and nothing but the presidency? And what if the Republican Party, the party that created the modern imperial presidency during the Nixon administration, has looked at the Romney electoral results, the Romney electoral map? What if the Republican Party has looked at the changing demographics of the electorate, changing in ways that can only hurt them in future presidential elections? And what if the Republican Party realizes that the presidency is increasingly a long shot for the Republican Party, and they have decided it is time to end the imperial presidency. It is time to deny the president, wherever possible, unilateral war-making powers that the presidency has been employing since the 1960s. What if the Republicans have decided it is time to shut down the presidency?
If we get in a habit where a few folks, an extremist wing of one party, whether it's Democrat or Republican, are allowed to extort concessions based on a threat of undermining the full faith and credit of the United States, then any president who comes after me, not just me, will find themselves unable to govern effectively.
The Republicans could not defeat him at the ballot box, and so now they are determined to prevent the president from governing. They are not trying to shut down the government. They are shutting down the presidency. They are not trying to defund Obamacare. They are trying to defund Obama. The only thing they are trying to defund in government is the thing they have attached the president's name to. The House Republicans are on their way to passing individual bills to fund every aspect of government except President Obama's signature legislative achievement. The Republicans built the imperial presidency in an era when they firmly believed they would never, ever again have control of the House of Representatives. The Democratic majority in the House of Representatives then was huge. It was insurmountable, and it was permanent. So believed everyone in Washington, everyone in politics, Democrat and Republican. The Republicans had a fighting chance in those days to control the Senate from time to time, but they believed, especially with their Southern strategy, that they could approach something of a permanent hold on the White House, just as the Democrats had a permanent hold on the House of Representatives. And so Republicans wanted to see as much power as possible residing in the White House. But now they don't. Now they are building the imperial speakership.
Any president who comes after me, not just me, will find themselves unable to govern effectively.
And so the question tonight is, are they really the Boehner bunglers? Or do Republicans know exactly what they're doing? Joining me now, former Vermont governor and DNC chairman Howard Dean and the National Review's Robert Koster, both are CNBC contributors. Governor Dean, I don't like stupidity or evil or incompetence as explanations for why people in Washington do what they do. I think in your experience and mine, most of them are pretty smart about how they're making their choices most of the time. And when I try to find the reason in what I'm looking at here, it seems to me that this new Republican Party no longer wants an imperial presidency. They want the power to be in whatever part of that government they can control.
Well, I look at it somewhat differently. I was on a talk show this morning with a Tea Party candidate who's going to run against Pete Sessions, who's one of the most conservative Republicans from Texas. And her point of view was basically that this ought not to be. She actually said the United States is not really a democracy. It's a representative republic or something like that. I actually think the Tea Party fundamentally doesn't believe in democracy unless they're in charge of it, which is a little different than saying they just want to weaken the presidency. So I think they're in terrible trouble. I saw a poll on the way in here, which is unbelievable. Obama's underwater by -6 in terms of his favorable unfavorables. The Democratic Congress is under by -9. The Republicans in Congress are under by -44. And there's a fairly good chance, which nobody would have said 6 months ago, that we're going to have a Democratic control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency after 2014. But so, no, you couldn't want to do this on purpose. I'm sure there's some people who agree with that, and the Tea Party probably does, but I doubt that John Boehner does.
Robert Koster, you have great Republican sources on this. They're looking at the same polls that Governor Dean sees, that we all see, about this is really dangerous for their congressional elections upcoming. They don't seem to be worried about that. Are they more worried about that inside than we think they are? Normally, when you get worried about that, you kind of solve the problem pretty quickly.
It's a great question, Lawrence, and I understand your argument, but maybe I'm too close to covering the situation. But to think that there's some kind of grand design right now, especially within the House Republican Conference, I don't see it. If anything, I see confusion. I see indecision about how to move forward as the clock ticks and the debt limit deadline approaches. And I see Speaker John Boehner just grappling with his own power within the conference, not able to manage many of the blocs, especially the conservative, the right flank. And as much as maybe broadly the party would like to diminish the presidency in the second term of President Obama, at the same time, the House doesn't have a coherent strategy to do that. And if anything, they're infighting.
Well, let me just add to that point, Robert and Howard. All these things, in my view of this, can be consistent. It can be consistent that they don't exactly know what to do next. But what is very clear is what the president said, that this kind of constant recurring crisis over things that used to be routine is something that he is trying to protect future presidents from suffering. But it seems to me that this new House Republican Party is going to want to use exactly this kind of weaponry on this president and future presidents.
Well, let me make the opposite case for just a second. What they've done by this incredible resistance in the House to doing anything is just saying no. It's emboldened the president to do all sorts of things. For example, the Environmental Protection Agency is about to enact by rule a number of things that they couldn't do by law. And so I would argue this has emboldened the president to continue with his agenda since the Congress refuses to work with him.
Let's listen to some of the dissent that's going on within the Republican Party now. Representative Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania.
If I had to cast blame anywhere, I would say it was Senator Cruz and those who insisted upon this tactic that we all knew was not going to succeed. I mean, what he did essentially, Senator Cruz, basically he took us all he took a lot of folks into the ditch. Now that we're in the ditch, we can't get out of the ditch. The senator has no plan to get out of the ditch. Those of us who do have a plan to get out of the ditch and will vote to get out of the ditch will then be criticized by those who put us in the ditch in the first place.
Robert, to your knowledge, have there been any House Republican meetings in which the Speaker or anyone else has raised the issue of how does this affect them in the next congressional election?
Oh, very much so. In fact, I spoke recently with Congressman Dent and many other pragmatist Republicans within the House, and they met with Speaker Boehner last Wednesday and Thursday, and they told him they don't want to see a default and they want to end the shutdown because when they look ahead to 2014, they think that Republicans, as much as they argue internally, will not shoulder the blame. They think they very much will shoulder the blame, especially in those suburban moderate districts in the collar counties of Philadelphia and elsewhere. But that message just isn't getting across to the conference. I think that's a problem for Boehner.
Let's listen to what the president said about what the continuing resolution that they're struggling over actually really is. Let's listen to this.
The bill that is being presented to end the government shutdown reflects Republican priorities. It's the Republican budget. The funding levels of this short-term funding bill, called the CR, is far lower than what Democrats think it should be. Nevertheless, Democrats are prepared to put the majority of votes on to reopen the government. So when you hear this notion that Democrats aren't compromising, we're compromising so much we're willing to reopen the government at funding levels that reflect Republican wishes, don't at all reflect our wishes.
Howard Dean, that's a perfect description of how Republicans constantly move the goalposts, and I haven't seen what the successful Democratic strategy is in response to that moving of the goalposts.
Well, I think you're seeing, I agree with that, and back in the last session when Mitch McConnell said the only thing he cared about was getting rid of the president before his second term, I thought that he was really a guy who didn't know how to take yes for an answer. And that's when the president was making all kinds of concessions. So, basically this continuing resolution includes the sequester money, so it really is a Republican budget. I'm actually somewhat surprised some of the Democrats in the House have agreed to do it. I think the president looks very strong here. I really do. You cannot tie a policy matter to whether you're going to pay your debts. The fact is that these Tea Party people and John Boehner and the Republican caucus allowed this CR to go forward before and supported it. So it's their budget. So then to turn around and say, well, we're not going to pass the budget that was we're not going to pay the debts that we incurred because we didn't get our way in Obamacare, that's just not going to play with the American people. And if you think this is rough, wait till the 17th of October. The 19th of October, 2 days later, I guarantee you the Dow will be down 2,000 points and everybody, Democrat and Republican alike, will have huge hits in their 401k. And I don't think the president is going to get the blame for that.
Howard Dean and Robert Costa, thank you both very much for joining me tonight.